The morning mist clung to Ravenshire Manor like a funeral shroud, its tendrils weaving through the ancient oak trees that had witnessed 3 centuries of Blackwood sorrows. Duke Edmund Blackwood stood motionless beside the freshly turned earth, his black mourning coat stark against the pale September dawn. The grave before him was a wound carved into the perfectly manicured gardens that Lady Catherine had once tended with such devoted care, her delicate hands coaxing life from reluctant soil, while her husband remained buried in ledgers and political ambitions. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, Father Morrison's voice trembled like autumn leaves, his prayer book closing with the finality of a coffin lid. The elderly priest had baptized Catherine 26 years ago, had married them in this very chapel, and now he committed her mortal remains to the Yorkshire earth that would claim them all eventually. "Your Grace," he whispered, his weathered hand briefly touching Edmund's shoulder. "Lady Catherine rests with the Lord now. Her suffering is ended." Edmund's jaw clenched until his teeth ached. Suffering. The word tasted bitter as hemlock on his tongue. Yes, Catherine had suffered, but not from the consumption that had finally claimed her fragile lungs. She had withered away in the cold shadow of their loveless marriage. Starved for the affection he had been too proud, too foolish, too terrified to give. He had been consumed with expanding the Blackwood holdings, with his seat in Parliament, with maintaining the family's ancient prestige. Meanwhile, his young wife had faded like a pressed flower between the pages of his neglect. The funeral procession dispersed like smoke on the morning breeze. Distant relatives who had come for appearances' sake retreated to their carriages, their duty done. Local nobility offered stilted condolences before escaping to their own comfortable lives. The servants melted away into the manor's shadows, their whispered conversations echoing off marble floors and mahogany paneling. Only Edmund remained by the grave, his vigil stretching until the sun climbed high above the Yorkshire dales, painting the countryside in golden hues that Catherine would never see again. When gnawing hunger finally drove him inside, he found Ravenshire Manor transformed into something alien. The very air seemed different without Catherine's gentle presence. Mirrors were draped in black crepe, clocks had been stopped at the moment of her passing, and the servants moved with the hushed reverence reserved for houses of mourning. Mrs. Holloway, the iron-spined housekeeper who had served the family for 30 years, was directing the staff with military precision, but even her usual composure seemed strained. The death of a mistress always unsettled the servants carefully. "Ordered world." "Your Grace," she approached with measured steps, her keys jingling softly at her waist. "My deepest condolences. The household stands ready to serve during this difficult time." She paused, consulting a small notebook. "The new girl from Millbrook village arrived this morning as scheduled. Given the circumstances, shall I send her away? I can arrange for her to return." When the period of mourning has concluded, Edmund barely registered her words, his mind still trapped in the cemetery among the headstones of his ancestors. "Whatever you think best, Mrs. Holloway. I trust your judgment in household matters." He retreated to his study like a wounded animal seeking its den, desperate for the familiar comfort of leather-bound ledgers and crystal decanters. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, masculine scents that Catherine had never disturbed. Numbers had always made sense to him in ways that people never did. Profit and loss, debits and credits, these were honest things that followed logical rules. But today, even the familiar columns of figures blurred together like watercolors left in rain. The grandfather clock in the corner marked each passing hour with accusatory chimes. Tick-tock, tick-tock, counting the moments he had wasted, the words he had never spoken, the love he had never declared. He poured himself a brandy, then another, but the amber liquid only sharpened his guilt instead of dulling it. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the Persian rugs his grandmother had brought from Constantinople, a soft knock interrupted his brooding. The sound was tentative, respectful, nothing like Mrs. Holloway's authoritative rap enter. He called without looking up from the meaningless papers scattered across his desk. Light footsteps approached, softer than Mrs. Holloway's measured gait, more graceful than the heavy tread of the housemaids. A delicate tea service clinked gently against the mahogany surface. "Your tea, Your Grace." The voice was soft and musical, with the subtle accent of the Yorkshire dales. Something in its timbre made Edmund glance up from his papers, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat like a fishhook. The young woman standing before him possessed eyes the exact shade of violet that had haunted his dreams for 3 sleepless nights. Catherine's eyes, impossibly alive and luminous in another's face. The girl couldn't be more than 20, with rich chestnut hair swept back in the simple style befitting her station, and skin kissed by country sunshine. Her dress was the plain gray wool of a parlor maid, serviceable and modest, but it couldn't disguise her natural grace. Those remarkable violet eyes, framed by thick dark lashes, were unmistakably familiar, yet somehow entirely her own. "What is your name?" Edmund asked, his voice emerging rougher and more demanding than he intended. "Rose Sullivan, Your Grace, from Millbrook Village." She executed a perfect curtsy, those violet eyes now properly downcast, but not before he had seen something else flickering in their depths. Intelligence, perhaps, or a quiet strength that reminded him achingly of Catherine's hidden reserves of courage. Edmund's heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The resemblance was impossible, yet undeniable. Some cruel trick of fate had brought him a living reminder of everything he had lost, everything he had failed to cherish while he still could. "Have we met before, Miss Sullivan?" he asked, studying her face for any sign of recognition. "No, Your Grace, I would certainly remember meeting you." When she looked up again, he felt as though he were drowning in déjà vu, caught between crushing grief and something far more dangerous. The tea grew cold as they stood in charged silence, the very air between them crackling with unspoken recognition. Edmund felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, as though the foundations of his carefully ordered world were crumbling. This girl was not Catherine, could never be Catherine. Yet her presence stirred emotions he thought safely buried with his wife. "That will be all, Miss Sullivan," he managed, turning back to his papers with hands that trembled like an old man's. As Rose's light footsteps faded down the corridor, Edmund pressed his palms against his temples, fighting the sensation that his sanity was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Surely grief was playing elaborate tricks on his overwrought mind. Surely this was nothing more than an unfortunate coincidence that time would mercifully ease. But as evening painted the sky in shades of mourning, deep purples and indigos that matched those impossible eyes, he found himself listening for those graceful footsteps, waiting with shameful anticipation for another glimpse of eyes that belonged to the dead. The Duke had buried his wife at dawn, but by dusk he had found her eyes in another, and God help his faithless soul, he was already lost. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream at Ravenshire Manor, each day blending into the next in a haze of guilt and growing obsession. Edmund threw himself into estate business, with the desperation of a drowning man, riding the boundaries of his vast holdings until his horse was lathered and his body ached with exhaustion. He inspected tenant farms with unprecedented attention to detail, reviewed accounts that had been perfectly managed for years, and buried himself in correspondence that could have waited months. Anything to avoid the corridors where Rose Sullivan moved like a gentle ghost, her violet eyes a constant, tortuous reminder of his failure as a husband and his weakness as a man. But escape proved impossible within the confines of his own home. She was everywhere he turned, a vision in gray wool that haunted his waking hours. He would find her polishing silver in the dining room, where Catherine had sat through countless silent meals, her delicate fingers arranging the family china with the same careful precision his wife had once shown. She dusted the drawing room where Catherine had waited for conversations that never came, her presence breathing life into spaces that had grown cold with neglect. In the library where his wife had sought refuge from his indifference, Rose moved among the books with reverent care, as though she understood their value beyond mere decoration. Most painful of all, she had taken over the care of Catherine's beloved rose garden. From his study window, Edmund could watch her tending the late-blooming varieties with the same gentle devotion his wife had shown. Her hands, smaller and darker than Catherine's pale fingers, coaxed the last flowers of autumn into reluctant beauty. The irony was not lost on him that a girl named Rose should prove so gifted with his dead wife's cherished blooms. "Your Grace seems particularly troubled these days," Mrs. Holloway observed one crisp morning, Her weathered face creased with the concern of long service. The housekeeper had raised Edmund from boyhood and knew him better than he sometimes knew himself. Perhaps a change of scenery would prove beneficial. London society is beginning its winter season, and your presence has been requested at several important gatherings. Edmund stood at his study window, watching Rose deadhead the last of the autumn roses with careful, practiced movements. "No, Mrs. Holloway, my place is here, managing the estate. I have no desire for London's distractions." The housekeeper followed. His gaze and her expression grew knowing, the look of a woman who had witnessed 3 generations of Blackwood folly. "The new girl is working out exceptionally well, quick to learn, respectful in her manner, and surprisingly educated for her station. Though I must say, she asks rather unusual questions." Despite himself, Edmund felt his attention sharpen. What sort of questions? About the late Duchess, primarily, her favorite flowers, her daily routines, what books she preferred to read. Mrs. Holloway paused meaningfully, her shrewd eyes studying Edmund's carefully neutral expression, almost as if she had known Lady Catherine personally, which is impossible given her humble circumstances. A chill ran down Edmund's spine like ice water. That evening, he found himself in the library earlier than usual, pretending to read Wordsworth while his ears strained for familiar footsteps. Rose appeared precisely at 7 o'clock, as she had every night for 3 weeks, to tend the fire and straighten the room for the evening. Her movements were efficient yet graceful, each gesture economical and purposeful. "Mrs. Holloway tells me you've been making inquiries about my late wife," Edmund said without preamble, his voice cutting through the comfortable silence like a blade. Rose's hands stilled on the brass poker, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. When she turned to face him, those violet eyes held no shame or embarrassment, only a quiet, compelling curiosity. "Forgive me if I have overstepped, Your Grace. I meant no disrespect to Lady Catherine's memory. It's simply that the other servants speak of her with such genuine fondness, and her presence seems to linger so powerfully in every room. I found myself wanting to understand the woman who clearly made this grand house feel like a true home." "She didn't make it a home," Edmund said with bitter self-recrimination. "I destroyed that possibility long before consumption ever touched her lungs. I was too proud, too consumed with duty and position to see what I was losing until it was far too late." Something shifted in Rose's expression, a softness that was achingly familiar yet entirely her own. She moved closer, and Edmund caught the faint scent of lavender and roses that seemed to cling to her skin. "Perhaps Lady Catherine knew you loved her deeply, even if you struggled to find the words to express it. Your Grace, sometimes the heart speaks in a language the tongue cannot master." The observation hit Edmund like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. The words were almost identical to what Catherine had whispered on her deathbed, her final gift of absolution to a husband who didn't deserve such grace. How could this slip of a servant girl understand truths that had taken him years to recognize? "You speak as if you knew her intimately," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rose moved even closer, close enough that Edmund could see golden flecks in those violet depths. "I know what it means to love someone who cannot see past their own carefully constructed walls. Your Grace, some people build fortresses around their hearts, not to keep others out, but to keep their own deepest fears safely locked inside where they cannot cause pain." Edmund's breath caught in his throat. "And what could you possibly know of such complicated matters, Miss Sullivan? I know that true forgiveness isn't earned through penance or good deeds," she said softly, her voice carrying a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "Forgiveness is a choice to embrace love over bitterness, hope over despair, healing over the comfortable familiarity of old wounds. Your wife chose to love you despite your walls, didn't she? That choice was her gift to you both." The tears Edmund had been holding back for weeks finally spilled over, hot tracks on his cold cheeks. This remarkable young woman, this servant with impossible eyes and inexplicable insight, had seen straight through to his wounded soul with surgical precision. In that moment, he felt Catherine's presence so strongly he could almost smell her favorite lavender perfume, almost hear her gentle laughter echoing through the book-lined chamber. "Who are you really?" he asked, His voice breaking with the weight of desperate hope and terrible fear, Rose stepped back, her professional composure returning like armor sliding into place. "Just a servant, Your Grace, nothing more than circumstances have made me." But as she curtsied and moved toward the door, Edmund caught her hand, finding her skin warm and vital beneath his trembling fingers. She was real, solid, undeniably alive, not a ghost, then, but something equally mysterious and infinitely more dangerous to his peace of mind. "Rose," he called as she reached the threshold, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. She turned back, and in those violet eyes, he saw understanding, compassion, and something that looked remarkably like the hope he had thought died with Catherine. After she left, Edmund sat alone in the gathering darkness, his mind reeling with possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. Whether Rose Sullivan was miracle or madness, divine intervention or cruel coincidence, he was already halfway to loving her with a passion that made his feelings for Catherine seem pale. By comparison, the guilt was crushing, yet stronger still was the growing certainty that his late wife had somehow sent this extraordinary girl to him from beyond the grave. The dead, it seemed, were not yet finished with the living, and Edmund found himself grateful for their continued interference. Don't miss the stunning conclusion to this haunting tale of love, loss, and the possibility of second chances that transcend even death itself. Subscribe to our channel now for more emotionally captivating stories that will touch your heart and leave you breathless with wonder. Your next unforgettable journey awaits just one click away. The October storm that battered Ravenshire Manor arrived with the fury of a woman scorned, hurling rain against diamond-paned windows and sending ancient trees creaking in protest. For 5 tortuous days, Edmund had wrestled with emotions that seemed both profound betrayal and unexpected salvation. Catherine had been dead barely 2 months, yet Rose Sullivan's presence had awakened something in his chest that he thought buried forever beneath Yorkshire soil and crushing guilt. The storm outside matched the tempest raging in his heart. He had avoided Rose as much as possible, taking his meals in his study and conducting estate business from dawn until well past dusk. But tonight, with thunder shaking the very foundations of his ancestral home and lightning illuminating the darkness like divine judgment, he could bear the solitude no longer. His need to understand, to know the truth about this enigmatic girl with Catherine's eyes, had become an obsession that threatened his sanity. He sought her out with the desperation of a condemned man seeking absolution, his footsteps echoing through corridors hung with portraits of disapproving ancestors. He found her in Catherine's old sitting room, the intimate space his wife had claimed as her refuge from the world's harsh realities. Rose sat in Catherine's favorite chair by the tall windows, mending household linens by the warm glow of an oil lamp. The sight stopped Edmund cold, for in that moment she looked so achingly familiar that his heart nearly ceased beating. She sat exactly as Catherine had, with the same unconscious grace, the same slight tilt of her head when concentrating on delicate work. The lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair and cast her face in golden relief, emphasizing the elegant line of her throat and the determined set of her jaw. Those remarkable violet eyes reflected the same quiet melancholy that had haunted his wife like a persistent shadow. "Miss Sullivan," he said softly, not wanting to startle her from what appeared to be deep contemplation. She looked up without the surprise he expected, as if she had been expecting his rival. Perhaps she had felt the same inexorable pull that had drawn him through the manor's labyrinthine passages. "Your Grace, you shouldn't be here alone with me. The servants will talk, and your reputation has already suffered enough whispers. Since Lady Catherine's passing, nothing about this situation could be considered proper," Edmund admitted, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. The action was scandalous, but he was past caring about society's ridiculous rules. Yet here we are, drawn together by forces neither of us fully understands. Rose carefully set aside her mending and rose gracefully from Catherine's chair, her movements fluid as water in the intimate lamplight. The resemblance to his late wife was even more striking, yet somehow she remained entirely herself. There was a strength in her bearing that Catherine had possessed but rarely displayed. a quiet confidence that spoke of trials overcome and wisdom earned through hardship. "I know what you're thinking every time you look at me, Your Grace," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the storm's fury. "I see the pain and confusion in your eyes, the guilt that tears at your conscience. You believe you're betraying Lady Catherine's memory by feeling whatever it is you feel when we're in the same room. Then you know this is madness," Edmund said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me how to stop it, Rose. Tell me how to honor my wife's memory while fighting these impossible feelings that grow stronger with each passing day." Rose moved to the rain-streaked window, her silhouette ethereal against the storm-darkened glass. When she spoke, her words were measured and careful, as though she had rehearsed this conversation in the privacy of her own thoughts. "The madness you speak of exists, Your Grace, but perhaps not for the reasons you imagine." She turned to face him, her violet eyes swimming with unshed tears that caught the lamplight like scattered diamonds. "I haven't been entirely truthful about my identity, or my reasons for seeking employment at Ravenshire Manor." Edmund felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean? Who are you really?" Rose clasped her hands tightly before her, knuckles white with tension. "My mother was Eleanor Whitmore before she married my father, a humble village blacksmith. 21 years ago, she worked here briefly as a seamstress, mending the household linens and helping with the ladies' more delicate garments. She was young then, barely 18, unmarried and considered quite beautiful by village standards." The surname hit Edmund like a lightning bolt. "Whitmore, Catherine's family name." Rose nodded, fresh tears spilling over her dark lashes. "Lady Catherine was my mother's younger sister by 3 years. They were exceptionally close as children, before circumstances and social expectations drove a wedge between them. When my mother married beneath her station, choosing love over security, the family cut her off completely. Catherine tried to maintain contact, but eventually even those secret letters stopped coming." The revelation struck Edmund with the force of the storm raging outside. All this time, he had been fighting an attraction to what he believed was a stranger bearing an uncanny resemblance to his dead wife. Instead, fate had brought him Catherine's own flesh and blood, her sister's daughter, the niece she had never known existed. "Then His voice failed him completely as the implications crashed over him like ocean waves. "Lady Catherine's niece," Rose finished quietly, "your wife's own blood, raised in poverty while she lived in luxury, separated by pride and social convention from the family connection we both craved." Her voice broke with the weight of old grief. "I came here after my mother's death last spring, hoping to learn something about the aunt I had heard about only in whispered stories and half-remembered lullabies. Mrs. Holloway had been my mother's dearest friend in their youth, and she offered me employment out of loyalty to that old bond." Edmund sank into the nearest chair, his legs no longer capable of supporting his weight. "Does Mrs. Holloway know the truth of your parentage?" She suspected when she saw my mother's face looking back at her from my features. "She's been protecting both of us from potential scandal, understanding that the truth would complicate an already delicate situation." Rose wiped away her tears with the back of her hand, the gesture achingly reminiscent of Catherine's own unconscious habits. "I should leave immediately, Your Grace. This situation has become impossible for us both, and staying will only cause more pain." "No." The word tore from Edmund's throat with desperate intensity. "You're all I have left of her, Rose. You're the living embodiment of everything good and pure about Catherine, combined with a strength she never quite managed to claim for herself. Don't you understand? Through you, I have one final chance to love properly, to give the devotion I was too proud and foolish to offer when it mattered most." Rose turned from the window, and in her face Edmund saw Catherine's infinite capacity for forgiveness mingled with her own hard-won wisdom. The combination was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly heartbreaking. "Then love me as myself, Edmund, not as her ghost or her replacement. Love me for who I am, not for who I remind you of." When she used his Christian name, something fundamental broke free inside Edmund's chest. The walls he had spent a lifetime constructing, the barriers that had kept him isolated even within his own marriage, crumbled like ancient masonry. He crossed the room in 3 urgent strides, and pulled her into his arms, finding her lips with the desperate hunger of a starving man offered sustenance. She tasted like tears and hope, like forgiveness and the promise of new beginnings. Her lips were softer than Catherine's had been, fuller and more responsive. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling with the force of emotions too long suppressed. "I cannot offer you marriage immediately," Edmund whispered against her forehead, his breath warm on her skin. "Society would crucify us both if we moved too quickly. The mourning period must be observed, appearances maintained, but in time, when propriety allows and scandal has moved on to fresher targets." "I don't need promises or proposals," Rose said, her small hands framing his face with infinite tenderness. "I need only your heart, freely given without reservation. No walls between us, no guilt over the past, no shadows of what came before. Just your love, honest and complete." "You have it," Edmund vowed with fierce certainty. "God help me, you've possessed it completely from the moment I saw those impossible violet eyes. I fought it, denied it, called it madness, but it was simply recognition. My soul calling to its mate across the void of grief and regret." As the storm continued to rage outside, they held each other in Catherine's sitting room, finding solace in shared understanding and the miraculous possibility of love born from loss. Edmund knew that society would condemn their eventual union as scandalously premature, that gossips would whisper about the Duke who replaced his wife before her grave had settled. But for the first time in his 35 years, he chose heart over duty, love over reputation, hope over the safe harbor of emotional numbness. Catherine was gone, claimed by consumption and his own criminal neglect, but she had left him an unexpected gift in the form of her sister's remarkable daughter. Rose had inherited more than violet eyes from the Whitmore bloodline. She had received their capacity for deep, transformative love and their strength to forgive even the most grievous of wounds. In the months that followed, their careful, respectful courtship became the talk of Yorkshire society. Some whispered of impropriety and indecent haste, but most who observed them together saw what Edmund himself had discovered: that true love could bloom even in the ashes of profound grief, that the heart's capacity for healing was limitless when guided by genuine affection and mutual respect. When they married the following spring in the same ancient chapel where Catherine lay buried, Edmund felt his late wife's presence like a benediction on their union. The ceremony was small and tasteful, attended only by close friends and the household staff who had witnessed their unlikely romance unfold. Rose walked down the aisle in Catherine's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame, her violet eyes shining with joy that illuminated the entire chapel. As they spoke their vows over Catherine's flower-covered grave marker, Edmund whispered a prayer of profound gratitude to the woman who had taught him that love's greatest triumph was not in possessing or controlling, but in letting go with grace and trusting in the possibility of second chances. The Duke had buried one great love at dawn, but by God's merciful grace he had found another by dusk, and this time he would not waste a single precious moment of the happiness fate had granted him. Thank you for joining us on this deeply emotional journey through love, loss, and the miraculous possibility of redemption. If this story moved your heart and stirred your soul, please subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales that explore the profound depths of human emotion and the transformative power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Your support helps us bring these unforgettable stories to life, and we can't wait to share our next breathtaking adventure with you. Hit that subscribe button now and let us know in the comments which tale of passion and romance you'd like to experience next.